A few years ago, I experienced the most serious injustice of my life. It all began when I opened the homepage of the website of the university where I was working and saw my name publicly displayed and denounced for what was a minor error. What followed affected my reputation, my standing, and my livelihood, and triggered more than a little trauma. In this video, I want to show you how I responded and how it's possible to meet injustice in a way that minimizes suffering, avoids unnecessary drama, and potentially leads to a greater sense of personal empowerment. This is what I call wise action. What follows is not about social justice ideology or its associated theories, but a different lens focused on personal experiences of injustice. I'm less concerned with systemic issues here than with moments where you feel wronged, blamed, humiliated, or treated unfairly. Work on systemic problems is not diminished by inner work. I believe it's strengthened because our experience of injustice is shaped not only by events themselves, but by our inner world, conditioning, and unresolved trauma. All of this is really about psychological maturity, or spiritual maturity as I usually call it. At its core, spiritual maturity is the capacity to assume responsibility for the mind, to develop a conscious relationship with thoughts and emotions as they arise from the mind, an approach taken from the world's greatest wisdom traditions. By the way, the mind card you're now seeing, with a little animation, is one of several such cards I share in this video. You'll find many more in the wisdom book, which I've just released on Amazon. Links are in the description, along with other books and videos I mention here. Now, back to today's video. Notice I said the wisdom approach is about developing conscious relationship with the mind. I didn't say it's about how to control thoughts and emotions. Nor did I suggest trying to get rid of them, which is basically impossible. Short of having your prefrontal cortex surgically removed, something I would strongly advise against. Your mind isn't going anywhere. We all have thoughts and feelings, and most of the time they aren't under our direct control. They typically arise spontaneously, often physiologically, as part of our evolutionary hardware, and often they emerge from social conditioning or past trauma. In my own case, the injustice I mentioned earlier forced me to revisit my personal philosophy, one shaped by years of self-work and sustained commitment to psychological healing. To explain, I need to give a little more detail about that difficult period. At the time, I was working as an academic at a university in Asia. I was one of only a small number of Western staff in an institution of nearly 30,000 students and employees. By then, I'd been employed there for around 5 years and had enjoyed an overwhelmingly positive experience, including receiving the highest possible annual evaluations on more than one occasion and consistently strong student feedback. The situation changed when the university introduced a new online grading system. Previously, grades were entered by an administrative staff, but now academics had to submit them personally online. We were warned that once grades were entered, they could not be changed and that any errors would result in a teaching violation. A serious offence carrying disciplinary consequences. The complication was that the system was not in English but in the local language. While I could speak the language reasonably well, my reading ability was limited, as was the case for most of the other foreign staff. At the end of the semester, I carefully checked and entered my grades somewhat nervously, and initially everything appeared fine. Then, a student contacted me to say his grade was unexpectedly low. When I reviewed his work, I discovered a genuine error. In a group assignment, one student had placed his name above another student's section, despite having contributed nothing. I therefore assigned the marks incorrectly. One student was penalized unfairly, the other rewarded unfairly. I faced a dilemma. If I did nothing, the injustice would stand. If I reported the error, I risked being charged with a teaching violation. From my perspective, the decision was clear. The mistake was ultimately my responsibility. So I went to the administration office and formally requested a grade change. The administrator was unhappy but accepted the paperwork, and I thought little more about it. But several weeks later, during the following semester, a colleague came to my office looking concerned and told me to check the university website. When I did, I saw my name displayed prominently. With the help of a translator, I read a public announcement stating that I had attempted to change student grades after the deadline, in violation of university regulations. I was to be publicly criticized before the entire university, unquote. My high evaluation status was revoked. Half my annual bonus was deducted, and I later learned I was barred from awards or grants for 5 whole years. Soon after, my college leader, or Captain Arthur, as I affectionately thought of him, attempted to terminate my employment, a decision that was only prevented by the intervention of my department head. Overnight, a previously supportive environment had become hostile, and I found myself effectively persona non grata. To say I experienced this as a punishment wildly disproportionate to the error would be an understatement. The announcement also contained false information. I had not personally altered grades after the examination period. I had submitted a formal request through the proper channels, fully acknowledging my mistake. Now, by this stage in my life, I'd already developed a strong mindfulness discipline and a structured approach to processing emotional difficulty. This situation became a severe test of that practice. I had a choice. I could react, escalate, and defend myself aggressively, or I could slow down, take responsibility for my inner state, and respond with care and restraint. What followed became one of the most formative experiences of my life. In the next part of the video, I will explain the process I used and still use in similar situations and outline key principles you can apply when facing personal injustice. I will also share the outcome of this episode, both personally and professionally. It may be not quite what you expect. The first piece of advice when encountering injustice is simple, though not easy. Whenever possible, delay your response. If you can, do not respond while you're angry or physiologically aroused, when your blood is boiling, or if you feel triggered, shamed, or betrayed. These reactions may be understandable, but when strong emotion dominates your system, clear thinking is compromised. The stronger the fear and anger, the more likely you are to project, exaggerate, or create unnecessary drama. Anger and blame seek discharge, not wisdom. Instead, wait until you've calmed down and processed the initial strong surge of emotion, which is what I did in this instance. How long you wait depends on the situation. Sometimes it may be only minutes in low-stakes disagreements. In more serious or ongoing situations, it may take days, weeks, or longer. Delay creates space to regulate your emotions, reflect honestly on your own part in what occurred, and take responsibility for unresolved emotional patterns. This reduces the risk of projection and escalation and helps prevent situations from spiraling into unavoidable personal and professional conflict. The next general rule is simple. Avoid gossip. Gossip is not emotional processing. Gossip facilitates and perpetuates drama and just generates emotional immaturity all round. Talking behind someone's back, recruiting allies, amplifying blame, it only multiplies drama and suffering in the long run. I make a clear distinction here with speaking to a trusted, responsible person who can help you stay honest and grounded. You know if a person is playing the role of a wise mentor or sage, if they listen to you attentively while also encouraging you to look at your own part in the situation. If the conversation turns into mutual outrage, if the other person is bringing up their own grievances and attacking others, that's no sage you're talking to. It's a drama queen. Drama demands an audience, after all. Wisdom doesn't demand anything. Now, in my own situation with the university, I did indeed speak to a few people, but these were confidential conversations where I shared my own concerns and, yes, anger at what had occurred. Nobody had any hard and fast solutions, so I played the waiting game and moved on to principle 3. This is where we reach the heart of this wisdom response. This principle is at another level entirely. It's for those who are genuinely committed to a wisdom journey and or personal healing. The core advice here is to take responsibility for your judgment. That means taking ownership of your inner world and recognizing how your mind is generating meaning, narrative, and identity out of what has happened. The mind does not interpret events neutrally. It tends to fold them back into recurring themes and deeply held beliefs that dominate our lives. I refer to such patterns as our soul story. When injustice strikes, the mind almost automatically reaches for familiar scripts, usually stories of betrayal, persecution, rejection, or being unfairly treated. Often there will be inward projections, where we might beat ourselves up for not being good enough, not smart enough, not lovable, or just a bad person. This is the territory where drama lives. The good news is that this is also where mindfulness and shadow work can be applied in a powerful way. These tools allow you to step out of the drama and develop an empowered relationship with the event you're experiencing. Rather than being trapped inside the story, you learn to witness it. Instead of taking everything personally, you begin to observe how the mind is operating. I can only touch briefly on these processes here. If you want to explore them in more detail, you might like to read my book, Discover Your Soul Template. But the essence is this. You bring conscious awareness to your thoughts and feelings for the entire duration of the life test you are facing. Not just once, and not just when it feels convenient, but consistently over whatever period of time is required, whether days, weeks, or even longer. To do this during periods of intense challenge, you'll almost certainly need to sacrifice some of your usual routines and replace them with deliberate inner work. For me, this typically means a combination of mindfulness meditation and what I call emotional alignment. When I'm facing situations like the one described earlier, I usually do this twice a day, early in the morning, and again in the evening before bed. That's what it takes for me to maintain emotional balance, preserve equanimity, and avoid being pulled into drama. The practical requirements are simple. Find a quiet space where you will not be interrupted. Ideally, it should be private because the process can involve the expression of strong emotions. You need to feel free to express yourself without self-censorship. At present, I do this in the basement of my home, which is where I am right now. The first phase of the process is straightforward, mindfulness. Sit quietly, allow yourself to relax. Bring attention to your breath and your body. Then begin to notice what feelings, sensations, and thoughts are moving through you, especially in relation to the situation that is testing you. During my experience with the university, I noticed anger towards administrators, strong judgment, paranoia about being punished, and a deep sense of betrayal. Simply noticing these reactions allowed me to acknowledge what was genuinely present within me, rather than denying or suppressing it. In my case, the emotional charge was strong. I could feel my need for drama was extremely high. I'd been triggered, and it was clear that these feelings were not going to dissipate quickly. That's when I moved into the second, more challenging phase of the process, emotional alignment. The aim here is to fully permit and express the thoughts and feelings associated with the potential drama, but to do so responsibly. This can be done through visualization, or more powerfully by using the body to act out what you feel like saying or doing. You bring the relevant person, people, or situation to mind, and you allow yourself to express everything that arises. No censorship whatsoever. In my own case, that looked like this. Fuck you. How dare you betray me after everything I've done for this place? What the fuck have you ever done for this university, you pathetic weasels? Go yourself. And that was just the nice part. Where I needed to shout, I shouted. Into a pillow. Where I needed a rant, I ranted. Where I felt like throwing something, I threw a cushion. Cushions and pillows are very useful for this kind of work. We don't want our neighbours calling the police, after all. You can also embody anger physically, for example, by striking a pillow. Over time, I found that I no longer need to hit anything with wild force. I can channel anger through a controlled and grounded movement. But how you do this is less important than that you do it safely and without harming yourself or anyone else. This kind of shadow work is confronting, and it must never be acted out in real life with the people involved. These emotional alignment sessions should be short and contained, ideally no more than 5 to 10 minutes. The goal is not to amplify anger indefinitely, but to allow emotional projections a conscious and healthy expression. Throughout the process, there must be a witnessing awareness present. Your deep self must be observing what is unfolding. If you find that the witnessing collapses and you're simply becoming more enraged or emotionally unstable, stop immediately, return to basic mindfulness. We're aiming for equanimity, not unconstrained catharsis. Prolonged escalation is a sign that the witnessing has dropped away and the process is no longer being held wisely. To complete the session, internal dialoguing can be very helpful. Speak to yourself in a mirror, in your imagination or symbolically. You might use an object or a soft toy to represent the wounded or angry part of yourself and respond to it with clarity and compassion. I also strongly recommend professional support when working at this depth. A psychologist or spiritual advisor who understands these processes can be invaluable. These practices should always be adapted to what works for you. In my own case, they were refined over many years with guidance from teachers such as Leonard Jacobson and others who might prefer to remain unnamed. I could not have done this work without them. Beyond the immediate drama of injustice, this approach can also be applied to deeper biographical healing, including what's often called inner child work. What triggers us in the present often mirrors unresolved emotional patterns from the past, rooted in childhood and our soul story. That work is important, but it goes beyond the scope of this video. Ultimately, these mindfulness and emotional alignment processes serve two main purposes. First, they help you understand the workings of your mind and reveal that there's a deep self beneath it. Recognizing that distinction can be genuinely transformative and can dramatically reduce unnecessary suffering and drama. Second, this deeper emotional work supports real healing by loosening the grip of the old narratives and potentially transforming your soul story into more empowering stories that more accurately reflect your deep self. Now, it's all very good to do inner work, but action in the real world is often still required to resolve personal conflicts, including situations of perceived injustice. This is where what I call wise action enters the picture. As I explain this, I'll also share the actions I took in my situation with the Asian University and the outcome that followed. Wise action ideally comes after the inner work and extends responsibility into real-world situations. There are two main benefits. First, we want to take actions that strengthen our sense of agency, support personal and professional relationships, and potentially elevate our trust, respect, and standing within our community or workplace. Second, we want to avoid feel-good but unwise choices that are destructive, self-destructive, or both. The aim is to sidestep unnecessary drama and suffering. In other words, we seek to embody the creator archetype, not the destroyer archetype. And we do not want to become the scapegoat, someone else's target. It may feel satisfying in the moment to vent and shout, "F you and your people." But 5 minutes of ego gratification can easily lead to years of personal and professional regret. That said, "F you" may be appropriate in rare circumstances, but I would generally avoid that option. Aim for resolution where possible, not revenge. And if the relationship has deteriorated to the point that it's no longer workable, walking away may be the wisest action. These are general principles. There may also be times when you need to stand your ground and fight. Often, wise action involves direct communication, expressed carefully and without blaming or shaming. If you've done your inner work such that it's not your shitty self speaking on behalf of your deep self, then you can be more present with others and the likelihood of escalation is reduced. That said, you cannot control the other person and you may not get the outcome you hope for. You may even be betrayed again. Still, I find that presence often disarms tyrants and old hags, transforming them into something less threatening. This is why we're all alchemists. We can't control outcomes, but we can choose our attitudes and immediate actions that help shape the conditions that make wiser futures more likely. Finally, remember that sometimes non-action is the wisest action. Choosing not to gossip, not to ruminate, and not to escalate can be powerful. At other times, what is required is inner change that has little to do with the external situation at all, such as therapy, meditation, counseling, or spiritual guidance. So, what actually happened in my situation at the Asian University? And what wise actions did I take or not take? First, I did the inner work I described earlier. Then I waited because it took time to process the emotional charge of the situation. It's worth noting that when my name first appeared on the university website, no administrator or representative contacted me at all. No explanation, no email, no nothing. About 2 weeks later, the same denunciation appeared again on the website. That was when I decided to write to an administrator asking for clarification. I worded the email diplomatically and CC'd several senior university figures. And I never received a response. Not ever. Yet by the end of the year, my staff rating had indeed been lowered, and I did indeed lose half my rather puny annual bonus. Oh, the humanity. Now, I did consider various possible other actions. Writing to higher authorities, getting a lawyer involved, coming to work dressed as Donald Trump just to trigger those feelings. Okay, that last one was not true. But as mentioned, I did speak with several colleagues and one trusted administrator, the one that saved my ass from getting fired. All agreed the situation was absurd and wildly over the top. Some staff even approached me independently to say the same thing. That helped me to calm down and choose to wait to see what might unfold. Perhaps I should say that I did apply for 1 or 2 jobs at other universities in the period after that, but nothing came of it. Then, about 6 months later, things shifted. The college leader, Captain Asshole, the one who'd wanted to fire me, and the key office administrator who didn't like me asking for the grade changes, both left the university. A new leader arrived, and he was very friendly and supportive. My 5-year ban on awards and funding was quietly lifted. Soon thereafter, I received the rank of outstanding once more, again in the annual evaluations. Everyone seemed to forget the whole episode had ever happened. My sense was that people were embarrassed by the stupidity of the affair. And so, both they and I let it go. The energy resolved itself. How boring is that? And that's exactly how I like it. Rather than feeding drama, I simply got on with my work, wrote a few more books, and built my Power and Presence online course. In this particular case, wise action mostly involved very little outward action at all, despite what looked like a clear injustice. Perhaps it really was some kind of cosmic test. And as far as I can tell, I passed the exam. Was this the only wise action available to me? I don't know. Maybe I could have been more assertive and challenged the bastards. Instead, I chose to do my inner work, write one modest email, and let the rest go. The water passed under the bridge. Such is life. And I'm not suggesting this is what you should do if you experience injustice or persecution. Wise action arises from listening to the intuition of the deep self and contemplating possible futures. You have to determine the wisest course for yourself, based on a conscious relationship with your mind, the world, and sometimes with very shitty people. I'm Marcus T. Anthony. Thanks for watching. If you'd like, feel free to share your own experiences or insights in the comments, especially if they add something useful to what I've outlined here. Until next time, see you in the futures.